My name is Doug Boxer. I want to welcome you all here. I'm an attorney here in California and lead the LA Fire Justice Office here at 221 East Walnut. I want to thank all of you here, victims and survivors of the fire, for being here tonight. It's going to be an incredibly useful and informative meeting. Mikal Watts here is going to give us some new evidence of how the fire started, tangentially related to the video that we put out about 2 months ago. But before I start, I want to introduce Corey Williams from the U.S. Small Business Administration. I'm hopeful that the members of the media that are gathered here tonight can share what Corey Williams is about to tell you about the deadline for participating in some very important federal programs for people who suffered damages from the fire. So Corey Williams is going to take 2 minutes and just give us an update on the programs there, and then we'll get our program started. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Doug.
Good evening. My name is Corey Williams, Public Information Officer with the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. And my heart goes out to all those who were impacted. I've been here since January 26th, probably not quite as long as Doug has been here. But I wanted to make sure that, to emphasize that even though the deadline is passed, SBA is still within what's called our grace period. So the grace period still allows you to apply for the SBA loans with the full array of packages all the way through May 30th, 2025. So just a reminder that homeowners can borrow up to $500,000 to repair, replace disaster damaged real estate, and up to $100,000 to repair, replace disaster damaged personal property, which would include any automobiles lost. Interest rates are as low as 2.563%. Again, there's no payment for a year, and there's no interest accrual for an entire year as well. And then renters can borrow up to $100,000 to repair, replace disaster damaged personal property, again, which would include any automobiles. And for our business owners, businesses can borrow up to $2 million to repair, replace disaster damaged real estate inventory, machinery, equipment. But the most important thing that I emphasize for our business owners is the need for working capital, and that's the purpose of the economic injury disaster loan, which is providing working capital for businesses that were impacted in the Altadena as well as Palisades area. Those interest rates are as low as 4%. Again, no closing, no payment for a year, no interest accrual for a year. So, you know, we want to make sure that as a federal partner, and thank you so much, Doug, for allowing us to be a part of this, that we want to make sure the messaging is out that the grace period is still active until May 30th, 2025. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Corey. That's an amazing program that the SBA run, and I've told Corey this before. I'm actually an alumni of the U.S. Small Business Administration, having worked there in the 90s. And what they do is pretty awesome, and especially with the no interest accrual and no payment for a year. So hopefully you take advantage of that opportunity if you're so inclined. So welcome everyone again. Doug Boxer, attorney with LA Fire Justice. Normally I would have Chris Holden, who's our CEO and former member of the state legislature and city council member from Pasadena for 2 decades or more, introduce everyone here tonight, but he had some minor surgery yesterday. He's doing fine. He'll be back in our office on Monday, so welcome. Just a little bit about LA Fire Justice and what we've done over the years. For the past 8 years, we've represented over 20,000 fire survivors and victims. Sadly, I've had to come in to communities just like Pasadena, Altadena, Sierra Madre, to have to educate people on why we believe this utility is responsible, Southern California Edison, for the damages that you've had to suffer. It never gets easy to come into your communities, these communities, and my heart goes out, as Corey said, to you. But I really appreciate you being here to learn a little bit more about what we do and how we do it, and why we think we're some of the best people that are doing it. Before I get started and before I introduce Mikal Watts, I want to show you a brief video. This is a woman who we've worked with in Maui. I want to show you this because we're not even 2 years past the fire in Lahaina, but I want to show you some hopeful signs. And so I'm going to show you this video, and then we'll come back and we'll get our program started in earnest. So we show that video in part so you can understand there's people, as you know, behind these fires. You're some of them, but also to see the houses coming out of the ground. And I'm going to introduce Mikal Watts now because I don't think there's too many people more integral to the people of Maui having ultimately the resources to be able to do that and rebuild than Mikal and the team of people that we work with. We did this up in Northern California, in Santa Rosa, in Sonoma and Napa counties, and then again up in Paradise outside of Chico, where we resolved that case for $13.5 billion, in large part because of Mikal and the legal skills that he brings. He's going to tell you how he prosecutes this. He's going to show you the hard work that he does with the experts to prove this case. Ultimately, this is about proving Edison's equipment caused this fire. And from there, everything flows. That's the most critical thing we can do. Thereafter, we have a team of people here in our 6,500 square foot office on Walnut that will help guide you through the process. They'll be there for you. You can lean on us. Some of them are in the other room in green shirts. Hopefully you met them all. Wonderful people from the community. But I really want you to hear from Mikal so he can show you a little bit about the work we've been doing and why we feel pretty good about the liability aspect of this case.
First of all, thank you for coming. I do want to reiterate that the rule of primacy is alive and well tonight. As important as everything I'm going to talk about is what Corey just talked about. There are, by my count, 11 press cameras. When you run your stories tonight about whatever you think is interesting here, please put the new deadline for the SBA. That's huge that he's willing to come here because they've got this grace period. We're not seeing a lot of grace in our politics right now, but the fact that the SBA is willing to extend its deadline to help you, take advantage of that, okay? And please put up on the TVs the deadlines so that you can get the word out. This is one of the best examples that I've seen of people who do what I do, working with the Fourth Estate to get information out. I appreciate everybody from the media being here, and of course everybody that was victimized and survived this fire. Thank you for being here. I've seen a lot of familiar faces. What my job is today is to update you on our progress about what we've learned and what we're doing. And the case continues to get stronger and stronger. We've got 9 things that I want to talk to you about. 8 of them are on this screen. But you've probably already noticed that from the standpoint of our outreach, we have been here early and often trying to get the information out because this gentleman, and I'm not here to demonize him, he is the chairman of the board and the chief executive officer of Southern California Edison. His name is Pedro Pizarro. And he's doing his best in a tough situation, but I'm here to show you how his story has changed. And the bottom line is that before this fire happened, he gave an interview that said, hey, Edison hadn't been as much trouble as Southern California, as PG&E. To what do you attribute that? And he says, I'm just going to be honest and say in part it's luck. Now, I'm here to tell you that what happened to Southern California Edison and your town has nothing to do with luck. It has to do with neglect. And the story that we're able to put together 3 months into this fire is that this did not happen because of bad luck. It happened because of neglect, because of foreseeable hazards that were not mitigated by this utility. So let's go through this. The bottom line is that Edison has a choice, and it owns transmission lines. And again, transmission lines are the big ones on steel poles as opposed to the smaller ones on wooden poles that go into your neighborhoods. And one of the reasons that we were out here early is Mr. Pizarro put out a statement to CNBC on January the 15th and said, we've not seen any evidence that electrical equipment was involved in the start of this blaze. We already had people up on the mountain digging around, documenting the evidence on your behalf, showing what we knew, and we knew this was not true. So the chief executive officer of the utility is saying our equipment wasn't even involved, and they said that 8 days after the fire. So we came out here 3 weeks after the fire. We had a press conference. Again, a lot of you that are here were there, and we explained what we had already been able to demonstrate. And then we started getting the word out in this, what I'll call Altadena outreach program. The crux of what everybody was interested in is we had done what's called a LiDAR analysis that I'll show you. We have updated that analysis. It's new, it's more compelling than what we did in January. But when Pizarro says our equipment was not involved, the video and the LiDAR showed demonstratively that SEE's equipment was involved and was the source of the fire that incinerated Altadena and killed 17 people. So we started working on the 27th to get the word out. We not only had a press conference, we shared that information with about 700 people involved in the labor union movement, and labor built this country. It's going to rebuild this town, and so I wanted them to know first. We put out a video that all of you have seen by now, and Pizarro has to backtrack. His first story was our equipment was not involved. Now it's like after we see the video, we went back and say, hey, are there some things that we don't understand here that we should bring back into the fold? That is SEE speak for maybe we need to reconsider our position that we didn't do it, since the video shows that our equipment most decidedly did do it and did start the Eaton fire. So that happens on February the 6th. We had our first client town hall meeting on the 7th. I think you've heard me say I do not talk to people in the first 30 days. You got all sorts of traumas. You didn't need lawyers talking to you, but we needed to start educating the community. So we had our first town hall on the 7th. We had a second one on the 8th. We had what I call a leaders group, a dinner for the leaders of Altadena on the 21st to try to start getting the message out of what happened. And a lot of your community leaders were there and are educating the community that what Southern California Edison was selling was just not true. It was their equipment that started this fire. And so we continued this outreach program on the 27th. On the 28th, we met with the Teamsters. On March the 26th, I had a legal seminar as far away as North Carolina to talk to other lawyers about what we had learned, while Harold DeLuise was telling our clients with respect to what the insurance situations are looking like. And we have insurance workshops every weekend so that we can keep not only our clients, but members of the community that need this kind of technical assistance to get it. Because this is your first time going through it. My team's been through it 21 times. We've represented 21,000 wildfire survivors. The same challenges are presented fire after fire after fire. And that's unfortunate, but that also gives us the ability to provide, we've been there, we've done that, we know what the process needs to be. We will go to every part of this community, whether it's black, brown, yellow, I don't care. Whoever it is and whatever language they speak, anybody that was affected by this fire, we want to communicate. And we will do that in houses of worship as well. We will go anywhere where we are invited to get the information out. That's what communities do. They educate themselves and they act cohesively when you have these kinds of challenges. And that's exactly what the community of Altadena is already doing, and I commend you for it. It's a wonderful place where you live. It will be wonderful again. We will rebuild this community together. So that's been the outreach, and that outreach will continue. I'll be back here on May the 15th. It's a little ironic, that video that you saw. We had a hearing in Maui yesterday about how we're going to divide up $4 billion in settlement funds. And then today, this morning, we had a hearing with how we're going to secure evidence to prove the case that will ultimately lead to a settlement. We'll have a hearing here like we did yesterday in Maui. And so it's a circle, okay? It's a process, and there's certain steps that need to be taken. The first step is to prove what's called liability, that they did it and therefore owe the money. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is how the Eaton fire started. I've discussed this before, but the way this happens is we take satellite imagery that shows where the smoke is coming, and we go back to the source of the smoke, and then we will overlay the infrastructure to see whether or not there was utility infrastructure in the location where the smoke started, and here we overlaid that, and there was a transmission line that goes between What we knew the area of origin was, where the smoke was, in between the Goodrich substation and the Gould substation. So this is kind of a, and I hate, this is so trite, and it's almost where there's smoke, there's fire. This is literally what we're doing, is to try to reconstruct. So once we do that, we go back and we say, okay, we think it's infrastructure. We don't think it's lightning because there was no lightning. We don't think it's arson because it was in the middle of a 50-degree area on the side of a hill. It'd be like starting a fire in the middle of the Egyptian pyramids. The only thing that was up there that can provide an ignition source is these 3 transmission towers. I have nicknamed them Tower 1, Tower 2, and Tower 3. They are on what's called the Mesa-Sylmar line. But importantly, Tower 3 was deactivated. I've got some new information for you as to why and when that happened and how poorly it was done. That is the reason that your town was burned down. This Tower 3 is called M16T1. Southern California Edison said it's been deactivated since 1971, 54 years ago. So that leads to the obvious question, how does a deactivated line get energized such that it can ignite a fire that becomes a major conflagration such as the Eaton fire which burned down your town? Well, we'll get to that. So what do the witnesses say? Again, bragging about the Fourth Estate, your ABC affiliate did some of the really good work. Channel 7 interviewed 4 of the key witnesses within days after this. And what I noticed is 3 of them, Brandon Ford talks about his power flickered at 6:10. Harry Kurtanian says his mother says she saw the power line sparking at 6:10. And a guy named Max Belin tells the New York Times that he saw a flash of light followed by a small blaze at the tower's base. So from 3 different orientations, we have 3 different witnesses, all saying the same thing with respect to something that occurred at the same time. So that's a really good start that this good coverage from Channel 7 was able to get us. Now, knowing that they had a problem from the standpoint of what the video was showing, but they hadn't seen the video yet, right? In addition to saying it wasn't my equipment, Pizarro now says, well, typically when you have a fire caused by electrical infrastructure, you'll see a voltage drop or a current increasing, and we didn't see that. His problem is that we already knew that was not true because of an outfit called Whisker Labs. Whisker Labs has approximately 3 million voltage meters that are attached to utility lines across this country. And Whisker Labs is somebody that I dealt with in the Maui fire litigation. And we talked to them and they said, look, there's 2 very clear faults that are detected on this line at 6:10 and 59 seconds in the evening, and 3 seconds later at 6:11 and 02 seconds. And that fault is detected between the Goodrich and the Gould substations. So not only is Pizarro directly wrong, it happens to line up with the timing of the 3 witnesses that we already have. Okay? We have flashes of light, we've got flickering, we've got flames, all around 6:10 according to those 3 witnesses, and now we've got 2 faults at 6:10:59 and 6:11:02. So it's coming together very nicely. When the CEO of Southern California Edison says normally you have a drop in voltage, well, that's exactly what the data shows at 6:10:59 and 6:11:02. So it's pretty clear that we're onto something very early on in the investigation. After we have the press conference, Southern California Edison has to put out a letter. You know what? Ignore what my CEO just said. Now we have to acknowledge that a fault was detected at approximately 6:11. Their new excuse is, but that fault was from 12 miles away. To which I say, nonsense. Electricity travels along lines. It's not quite the speed of light, but it's very quick. It's electrically connected. This fault was felt as far away as Las Vegas. It was a major fault. And then we're starting to do what's called LiDAR analysis. We have 14 different videos and photographs from 14 different individuals all across the clock dial from different perspectives surrounding this tower. We had people that went up to the mountain and in effect digitally recreated it through what's called a LiDAR analysis. They finished on a Friday afternoon. And the guy says, I'm going to go home now. He's from Dallas, Texas. And I said, that's great. And on his way to the airport, my buddy Jerry Singleton says, hey, I represent a gas station in Altadena called the ARCO station, and they have a security camera that I just got my hands onto. You want to see it? I say, oh yeah. And so I called my expert, and I said, turn around, you're not leaving. We get the video from Jerry, and of course now all of you have seen this, and by itself it looks interesting but not that compelling. The light in the upper right-hand corner is a street light. The flash that you just saw is on this video. Kind of hard to make out, right? But we had already done the LiDAR analysis. We knew what equipment was where, and so we could, in effect, go to that first flash that you see, the second flash that you see, and then eventually you're seeing the start of a fire. So what's over there? It's kind of hard to see in the middle of the dark. Well, this is the animation, if you will, the LiDAR reconstruction that everybody has seen. And the bottom line is all you're doing is you're lining up fixed objects from the security camera video, and you take those fixed objects and you overlay the video, and you can see whether the light is coming from those fixed objects. And this is what we had already disclosed in January. What's coming up next is what's called an augmentation analysis. Because this is digital video, you can in effect bring it up or clarify it. You see a lot of this in the movies. You know, clean that up, if you will, and that's what we're in the process of doing. But before we do the cleanup, you can see the analysis, and it's not analysis, just fact, but the bottom line is there is Tower 1, Tower 2, and Tower 3. There's a digitized reconstruction of the mountain, and we can see where that is. And now we can overlay the video, and it's just as compelling as you could be. It says what Pizarro, the CEO of Southern California Edison, was telling his ratepayers. It's just not true. So the bottom line is you have to believe your own eyes, not what somebody putting out spin for a major corporation that has billions of dollars of liability is trying to do to dodge that liability. And so this is what kind of got his mind straight about, well, maybe I need to come clean and say this may be our equipment. And this happened on January the 27th. There's the first flash or spark. It's right at the upper left-hand corner of tower number 3. There's the second flash. 3 seconds later, happens to be when you line up the time, it's at 6:10:59 and 6:11:02, which where I come from is pretty compelling. And then 12 seconds later, you're going to see at the bottom of the tower the start of flames. So we've got this thing bracketed in by 3 witnesses, by 14 videos, and now by a dead-on view showing the fire is visible. Now, this kind of got everybody thinking, okay, now we know what's happened. What we have been doing since then is a lot of work, not only with respect to what happened, but why and how, which is what I want to talk to you about today. So this came out on the 27th. Their defense at that point is a spark alone does not create a catastrophe. You can't make this up. Wildfires don't start without an ignition. So you need an ignition, let's call it a spark alone, to have a fire. You need an ignition source. So a spark alone can create that fire, and then given the conditions that we all know exist here, high heat, low humidity, dried out fuels, you have all the ingredients that are necessary to turn a small fire into a raging wildfire, and you throw in Santa Ana winds, and you've got a real problem. And the good part is we can't control a thing but whether or not you introduce that spark. So respectfully to Mr. Pizarro, he is just flat out wrong. This spark is the only thing that separates a catastrophe from your houses still being here. And his company provided it. Now, we did what's called a flash analysis. Just got this yesterday. I think for those of you all that are here from the media, you just got notification of this yesterday because we wanted to make sure we had it done. But the bottom line is the first part is what you've already seen. The first flash, we know where it was from. The second flash comes 3 seconds later. And then the fire at the origin of the base of the tower 12 seconds after that. But as we augmented this, what we realized is from the first flash, you can actually see material going from the site of the first flash down towards the base of the fire. And so what we did is we did what's called, oops, sorry, got ahead of it. Now I got to do it over again. I apologize. Yeah. Okay, now you got to watch it again. I apologize. But the bottom line is we did what's called a flash analysis. And as soon as we replay what I just messed up, I'll show you what we've done. Talking about laying it up for everybody to get your cameras ready, you know. But the bottom line is you bring it in closer, you're going to see when you look carefully that from that first flash, material is dropping down to the base of where the fire begins 12 seconds later. Doesn't take much. A spark can lead to a catastrophe, so can molten material that drops on dry grass, okay? And we've been able to pin down the time between the second flash and the start of the fire at 12 seconds. And here's what that analysis is showing, and this is pretty new. You can see the light coming down from the first flash, and the movement is downward. And that is super important in terms of being able to zero in about what it is that actually provided the ignition. And so what you have is you have a first flash, you have a downward travel of some sort of molten material that immediately is deposited at the base. And then within 12 seconds, the fire, which starts small, grows enough that you can see it. Now, why is that important? Over the last 3 weeks, we've gotten access to this stuff for the second time. You'll recall that my folks were up there within 2 weeks. We're taking as many pictures as we could, documenting what we could, and then we were, in effect, locked out, as was everybody else. And then eventually the lawsuits get filed, everybody wants access, we want to go back up and do that. And through a court-ordered process, that process has taken place since March 17th, and we've got a lot of new information to provide for you. But the bottom line is that before we get to that, you can see the fire into the line. It all lined up. We told the New York Times the fault date of the videos, the witness accounts, they all paint the same picture. They still do. We're just zeroing in about why that happened. You've heard me talk about Adrian Timoran, who shot this video at 6:14. If you look carefully at it, you can see that that fire is under tower number 3. And then we're able to take that, and in effect, because we have 3D LiDAR, documented, we can take it to the orientation where her camera was and just kind of reconfirm that what we see in the ARCO video is in fact what's seen from this. In fact, we did this before the Friday when the guy was leaving. ARCO video was done over the weekend, so this was the first one that we did, and ARCO was second, but it is certainly confirmatory. When you lay the video on top of the LiDAR, you're going to see where the fire started, exact same location as from the ARCO video. I can tell you we can do this 14 times, but it would just put everybody to sleep. It's the same thing from 14 different orientations. And so it's very confirmatory. We've got 3 other videos from Ms. Timoran, 3 minutes later at 6:18, at 6:19, and then eventually at 6:20. And what you're seeing is the growth of a fire that begins under tower number 3, moves down consistent with the Santa Ana winds down the hill, and eventually down into Altadena, where it claimed 17 souls, over 8,500 houses, over 10,000 structures, and wiped out a good portion of a lovely town. All right. We've got all sorts of ability to freeze frames because it's digital. We've got it all frozen. You can just, looking at your own eyes, you can see the direction in which the fire is growing. And so what our obligation is under California law, under what's called inverse condemnation, is I just have to prove that their equipment started the fire, and then they owe the economic damage, the property loss, caused by that fire, which I was talking to one of the lawyers from what's called the insurance subrogation people, the people that have actually paid insurance claims. They say their losses are between 10 and $13 billion, just the insured losses. And then you have all sorts of losses on top of what's insured, uninsured homes and the like. To give you a corollary, in Northern California, the insurance people got paid $11 billion. Individuals like you got paid $13.5 billion, and the governmental claims got $1 billion, so $25.5 billion. They took 11 for insurance claims. They're saying their damages are somewhere between 10 and 13. So it gives you the idea of the scope of what we're dealing with. This is a massive, massively expensive wildfire that Southern California Edison owes the bill for. Now, there's all sorts of different ways to line up all these videos, and I could take you through all of the different bells and whistles, but it just showed the same thing. But what does Southern California Edison say at this point? Well, Mr. Pizarro then tells the Los Angeles Times earlier this month, well, we still don't know whether Edison equipment caused the Eaton fire. I don't know what video he's looking at. Fortunately, he's honest enough to say it's certainly possible it did. With a video like that, I would use a stronger word than possible, like it's certain that it did. But, you know, whatever. I pledged to be transparent. I had to look this up because maybe it means something different in California than where I'm from. But transparent means you're going to be honest, forthcoming with the public as we continue to investigate. Well, I'm pleased with that promise, but I haven't seen it delivered upon because we've been up in the area where this fire started. Everybody's done all the analysis. Everybody's taken a bunch of pictures. And have they been transparent? That's why we're here checking them. And we'll talk about that. The next issue is why the Eaton fire started. We know from the videos and from the fault data and from the witnesses where it started and that it started from Southern California Edison's equipment. Why did it start? Well, fundamentally, it's because they didn't turn the power off in what's called a public safety power shutoff. Now, the New York Times did a good job a few weeks ago looking at that fault data all the way back, and as early as 4:28 in the morning and at 4:36 in the morning, the Whisker Labs fault data in the same area is showing that these lines are under siege, that they're having problems, they're having faults, and this is 13 and a half hours before, plenty of time to make a decision to shut the power off to avoid this fire. Southern California Edison, when asked by reporters, why didn't you turn the power off? They said, well, we have certain thresholds. And the wind has to be above that threshold before we decide to conduct what's called a public safety power shutoff. The New York Times then goes to all of the weather systems out here and picks up the wind data. And this graph on the left is very good, but the bottom line is that the Altadena area exceeded Southern California Edison's threshold for turning the power off, 68 miles an hour, at least 20 times that day. But they made the judgment not to turn it off anyway. Now, mind you, they turned it off nearby, but they didn't turn it off here where it would have mattered. And so, second reason that we had a fire is that decommissioned line was somehow re-energized. It was supposed to be lying dormant. I say it was abandoned, they say it was idle. Again, we can have a little word game here, but the bottom line is it shouldn't have been energized, and it got energized. How? Well, there's something called electromagnetic induction. It is a well-known phenomenon that you can, in effect, take energy or power from one line which is energized and transfer it to a nearby line which is not. You can do that in one of two ways. Southern California Edison in 2017 or 18 started the Thomas Fire through what's called a line slap. If you have adjacent lines that are very long between the towers, those lines sag as they get older and they swing in the winds and sometimes they'll come into contact. Physical contact is what's known as a line slap. But electromagnetic induction doesn't even require a physical touching of the lines. It requires close proximity, and the electricity will in effect jump from one to the other. As to whether this was a line slap or electromagnetic induction, that's still being investigated, but the hazard of induction is something that Southern California Edison knew of. We've got a lot more documents, but the bottom line is if you look at its own report to the California Public Utilities Commission in 2021, the Safety Metrics Report, they say that Southern California Edison uses previous safety instances to identify common causes. An example is the common cause evaluation conducted for induction incidents. Between 2012 and 2019, 10 induction incidents occurred at Southern California Edison, and we learned that a common cause was that our crews didn't know what it was and how to mitigate that damage. So they knew it could happen, they knew it was a hazard, they knew it had killed some people, and they knew that they needed to guard against the hazard of induction. Now, after we start talking about this in early February, Pizarro is forced to admit we certainly have a lot of attention and focus on the, quote, induction theory. But he admits that because it was not connected to anything, then induction ends up being a leading hypothesis. Now, what does this sentence mean? It means we now agree that the fire started from the decommissioned line, despite what we said last month. And we agree that because that line was not connected to anything that would energize it, induction's the leading hypothesis. It's the thing that makes the most sense. Line slap's the only other choice. Now, Pizarro, as the top guy at Southern California Edison, says an idle line always experiences some level of induction. The current flowing through the active lines creates electromagnetic fields capable of inducing currents on the inactive one. So we're really zeroing into why the line got energized. And he gave an interview to the Los Angeles Times on April the 11th, 6 days ago. So again, the case is kind of getting crystallized, if you will. And Pizarro says induction seems to be a key thing to be looking at here because the idle line was not connected to any equipment. It had no direct source of power. It was like an extension cord sitting on your floor, not connected to the wall. That would be fine unless you have a live line right next to it. And that's exactly what they had. Now, what is the evidence that we have that was in fact energized? Well, we see what's known as arcing. We know we have a fault. We know we have a surge of electricity. If something is energized electricity, the surge is going to go in both directions. So we need to go to both ends of where this tied off or inactivated line is and see whether we see arcing. So there's two different towers. One's 208 and one's 219. I'll take you through that in a bit. And the bottom line is we go in there and we start looking, and there's these curved instruments at the bottom line. I call them paddles now, and they're all showing evidence of arcing or electrical surge. What I've learned since we took these pictures 2 weeks after the fire is they shouldn't have been there in the first place. All of the standard procedure about how you decommission a line is you disconnect these so that they can't be the source of electrical induction. And yet when we look, you see classic evidence of arcing. At the very portion of the tower where the videos and the witnesses see the line. We released all this to the press. The Washington Post did a good job and said, well, we're not going to take some lawyers from Texas's word for it. They called 5 different experts and said, is this weather? Is he just wrong? Is it normal weathering? And they said, no, it all looks fresh. It looks like it's the result of a fault. And so here we are. We got to go to the other end of the line because if it's going to arc in one direction, it's going to arc in the other. And we go to the West Mesa-Sylmar termination, which is near the Gould substation. I want to look at the same line, and we see the same thing on the same line, and that is you start seeing evidence of arcing. These paddles show elongation, which means they weren't properly fastened and they're in effect, flopping in the wind. And then you can see the evidence of the arcing and the burning and the like. There's the cord that is disfigured. Arcing evidence exists on the opposite side of the line. Over and over and over again. We put these pictures out. We've since retaken them all since we were given access out there. Everybody now sees the same thing that we saw back in January. And that is very consistent evidence of arcing on the same line at the same location where the ARCO video, where Ms. Tameron's video shows that the flash began and the fire began. This is not weathering. This is not in dispute. This is clearly evidence of an energy source. So now we know why the Eden fire started. What have we learned from the standpoint of proof? Now, I think I've explained to you, we've already got them on what's called inverse condemnation. They started the fire, they owe the economic damage for the loss of your property under California's Constitution. But we also have things like cars, we have things like contents, we have your loss of enjoyment of your property, we have your mental anguish for being in the zone of danger and fleeing for your life from a 50-foot wall of fire. We have 17 families that lost loved ones, for which damage elements are available if we can prove that this company was negligent. Negligence is a lawyer word for doing something which is imprudent or doing something that somebody that was reasonably prudent wouldn't do, or failing to do something that somebody reasonably prudent would do. That somebody is utilities, so we can look up at PG&E, down at San Diego Gas and Electric, and say, what are their brothers to the north and the south doing? And this is where you're really going to start seeing the negligence case. There's 4 reasons they were negligent. There's a lot more, but these are the 4 primary. First, they were negligent in failing to remove tower number 3. And that's for a lot of different reasons, but there they are, Tower 209. It's one of 19 towers that was not taken down in 1971. But here's some new stuff that we learned. I was investigating the Hughes fire that started on the 22nd, and somebody came up with this old library pictures of the Hughes substation area back in, I think it was 1912. And I said, well, why don't we have that here? So Jerry White, my law partner, started digging around, and we found these. And the bottom line is, you go to the Huntington Library, you can see photographs of these towers actually being constructed back in 1923. So these towers were 102 years old. More than a century old. Now, if you build towers right, maybe they can last that long. Some of our buildings do, but they have to be what's called maintained. And so if you're going to put an instrument of hazard out there, you must maintain it over 102 years. What we've been able to reconstruct, and there's the gentleman building it back in 1923, 102 years ago, is that these 3 lines were all active, all supplying power to this area, including your town, until 1971. They were not intended to be deactivated or dead ends. In fact, they were initially in the middle of the circuit where the jumper wires connected the lines on one side of the tower to the lines on the other side, so that the circuit could continue. We've been able to reconstruct all of that, but what happened in 1971? Some of you that are my age or older may remember the San Fernando earthquake of 1971. It caused a lot of damage, and it specifically caused damage to the Sylmar substation, and that's probably our best guess when the Sylmar circuit went offline. Instead of trying to reconstruct it, they just took one of the lines off. Now, sometime between the earthquake in 1971, when it became idled, is what they call it. I say abandoned, 54 years ago. Seems like abandoned, but it doesn't really matter for my purposes. They removed all of the other towers on the circuit, miles and miles and miles of towers, but some genius decided to leave towers 208 through 227. And they left these 19 towers and lines in place to deteriorate and to be eligible to receive induced electricity from the adjacent lines that were still active. A couple of problems with that. When you have an instrument of hazard, like an abandoned tower, make sure that the sediment around it isn't literally falling away as the hill erodes. There's all sorts of stability problems as the foot of these towers has no dirt on one side of it. So that affects the tower stability. And we noticed that when we were up there the first time. It's just right on the edge, and that's not good. Okay, particularly, to a Texan, all of California is in an earthquake zone, but you get the point. Okay, so the bottom line is that this is an abandoned tower. And then you've got to learn from the lessons learned by others. Doug and I, and Aaron helped us, worked hard on a fire called the Kincaid Fire. We had the North Bay fires in 2017 and the Camp Fire that burned down Paradise in 2018. The Kincaid Fire in 2019 was just north of Santa Rosa where the North Bay fires had been. And in 2019, PG&E had an abandoned tower. It was supplying no power to anybody that had a C-bolt in effect come off and start a fire, and it burned down 100-something thousand acres. Lots of beautiful wineries. Fortunately, nobody was killed. But the bottom line is that they had to pay a $40 million fine. They spent $85 million removing this abandoned infrastructure so it wouldn't happen again. So their brothers to the north spent $125 million in 2019 to avoid this hazard from happening again. And yet Southern California Edison, knowing it failed to take down 19 of these towers, just leaves them up as if we're just gonna, it's a matter of luck, remember? Perhaps we'll just get lucky where PG&E got unlucky. That's not the way to run a utility. But that's what they did. And Pizarro, to his credit, tells the Wall Street Journal in March, we probably didn't see the insights there at that point in time that would have led to different steps here with our de-energized lines. Now that we've gone through this experience, we're taking a look at that. In other words, after we kill 17 people and burn down 8,500 homes and half a town, then we'll look at something we should have looked at based on what we learned from the Kincaid Fire 6 years before. This is classic ostrich thinking. You can't put your head in the ground and just ignore what's obvious. If you know that an abandoned tower can cause the Kincaid Fire and lead to a $40 million fine, perhaps you should initiate a process to look at all your abandoned towers and get them out of there before they burn down the town of Altadena. Now he makes the point, if we were a normal business or we can make choices on our own, there are certain areas that we would probably choose not to serve. Higher fire risk areas where we might decide if we had the discretion just not to put the infrastructure in. Now, interesting concept, but let's flip it on its back. If you have chosen to put in infrastructure in a high fire area and you're it, doesn't that same logic when you turn it around say maybe we should use due care to make sure that that infrastructure that we chose to put in high fire areas doesn't create an ignition source? You can't have it both ways. Now, he says the company often keeps such idle lines in place rather than taking them down in case that route for electricity is needed again. Removing the equipment could cause some of the property easements for those power lines to lapse. This is, and I've explained this before, there is a CPUC rules that says thou shalt get rid of abandoned lines. Where I come from, when you don't use a line for 54 years, that's abandoned. I abandoned the hair on my head decades ago. I'm never going to use it again. But because they got a rule change in 2005 during the Schwarzenegger administration, now it's what we called idled, because we may want to use it again. Now the good news is now that they burned down your town, they're pulling it all out of there right now. Okay, so it's not so precious that we need it for future use after we burn down a town. It's just before we do that. Okay. They've got a lot of guff for this. I want to throw kudos at NBC News in San Francisco, Jackson Vanderbeek. On March 15th, he and I worked for weeks about the regulatory transition from a wholesale ban on abandoned stuff to a change in the rule that says, well, it's only abandoned if the utility says it is. If they want to designate it as idle, they can keep it up. In other words, we're going to allow the fox to guard the hen house. And so with a flip of a switch, or the draft of a pen, an abandoned line since 1971, in 2005, 34 years later, somehow became idle. Between 2005 and 2025, it didn't supply 1 kilovolt of energy to anybody. It was still abandoned, but now they're classifying it as idle because the PUC changed the rule, you can keep it up. My recommendation to the PUC is, now that we've seen what happened in Kincaid, now that we've seen what happened here, perhaps they should reconsider their deregulation of a very good rule to get rid of abandoned infrastructure. But that's for another day. The Wall Street Journal, Catherine Blunt, excellent journalist, wrote a book called California Burning about our PG&E case. Aaron's in it, I'm in it. She really knows how to get to the bottom of things, but she says, look, this is focused increasingly on whether a decommissioned line was re-energized, sparking the deadly blaze. And she's right. Southern California Edison was negligent in failing to remove Tower 3. They're now removing them after the litigation. 54 years after the substation went offline, they've basically been a litter, serving no function, but posing a hazard for 54 years. In a court hearing on March the 5th, the court very intelligently asked Mr. Doug Dixon, the lawyer for Southern California Edison, he's a friend of mine. He says, well, it hasn't been energized for a very long time. There's not electricity running through it. He's explaining that. The court says, well, is there any plan to energize this idle tower anytime soon? And Dixon says, no. And in fact, we've already discussed that equipment's coming down and will come down soon. So we know it wasn't so important that they couldn't pull it down after they caused the fire. Beginning on April the 21st, 4 days from now, Southern California Edison's going to begin the process of taking those towers down. Between 208 and 227, they're going to make them available for inspection and testing and storage, but they're taking them down because they should have done it 54 years ago. They're completing a very detailed protocol that's being negotiated about how to do it, allowing us the inspection to preserve the evidence. And oh, by the way, they haven't committed to taking down 209 through 226 or the conductor that attached them, but we're going in the right direction, if you will, okay? Second reason they're negligent is they failed to properly inspect. In other words, if you're gonna lobby to get the rule changed from having to take down an abandoned line to let me keep up an idle line, you still have the statutory and administrative rulemaking obligation to inspect your lines on a systematic basis, to look for things that are wrong. So we say we want to go up and do the inspection. My people were one of the only people up there. Everybody else wants to look at it. That's good. And so we get a court order. Southern California Edison promptly puts out a press release like it was their idea. The next step will be Southern California Edison's first close-up physical inspection since the start of the Eaton fire. It's in close coordination with fire investigators, LA County, cities of Pasadena, Sierra Madre, and Plaintiffs' Council. Congratulations, you're going to inspect after a fire. And so we start the inspection. Interesting, as they're bragging about this inspection that they're now going to allow post-fire, they make the commitment to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation. Transparent means we're going to tell all those people with cameras about it. We're going to let the people know what we found. And so the inspection begins. Helicopters are up there on the 17th. There are workers up there. You can see them in the yellow jackets on 17th to the 21st. People are inspecting, looking for the very arc marks that I've already shown you on these different towers. Lots of work, lots of data gathering, documentation, photography, frankly, more high quality photography than my guys that were up there in a hurry during the couple of days that we were allowed there in January. Pizarro says again, we understand the community wants answers. We remain committed to a thorough and transparent investigation. It's time to be able to do more specific analyses of the equipment itself. If we see something that gives us the missing link, we're going to say so right away. Now, where I come from, right away means right away. And so what did they find? What did the photos, what did the inspections show? Well, instead what we get is we get a letter right after they say we're going to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation. They say, oh, by the way, anything we learned during this inspection, we're going to trade in what's called attorney's eyes only. That is a non-transparent way of saying we're going to get it locked up with secrecy agreements and litigation, and the people whose houses we burn down don't get to see it. Okay, that is not my definition of transparent, but that's what they've done. The bottom line of what we learned is there's something called jumpers, those round attachments that affix, that conduct. And the bottom line is instead of removing them, that they had been previously attached to the lines going to towers 206 and 228, or grounding them securely on towers 208 and 227 by properly attaching them to the towers. Southern California Edison, after this earthquake, did the fastest and sloppiest attachment work possible. And I'm going to show you what we've learned. And so the bottom line is from the ground, you can see the evidence of heat and arcing, and it has everything to do with slipshod work that was done 54 years ago that was never corrected because nobody bothered to go up there and look at it. A failure to inspect. The neglected jumpers. Now, what is a jumper? You saw the curved thing that's bolted in. Now, every one that we could find, they all come with 4 holes. They've got nuts, they've got screws, they've got washers. That's the way you create a tight connection that's not going to rattle in the wind. That's a properly grounded situation. There's more than one way to do it. And these are things that you can make to order. They come with the nuts and the bolts that attach them to the tower. There is an appropriate way to affix what's called compression terminals, I'm calling jumpers, to the tower to properly ground the electricity. So what do we see? There's improper paddle attachments to 208. On the left side, there's only 1 bolt out of 4, and so over the years that allows flopping. The paddle isn't flat on the tower. There's signs of arcing under the paddle. Here you see half the paddle has no contact on the side of the tower. Half of it's affixed, half of it's off, so it's not in the right place. Half the paddle has no contact on the side of the tower. It's in an oblong, not in a direct way. It's just slipshod work. The close-up of the jumper attachment at tower 208 shows the evidence of arcing that I've already shown you, and that's because they didn't properly affix it. It's just bad work. Now, this shouldn't have been there in the first place. When they decommissioned the line, if you're not going to take down the whole tower, at least take down the conductor. And they didn't do it. Same thing, 5.5 miles over on the other end of the line at tower 227. You see the paddle isn't even attached. There's evidence of arcing and melting on the paddle and the metal it touches. The paddle was laid to the tower with wire. It's just the worst work you can see. Both the wire and the paddles got hot and melted. The paddles begun just hanging there. You can see that one of the paddles affixed it with what's called a climbing bolt. Somebody just kind of came in and just tapped it in. That's not proper grounding. There's bird caging of the wire, showing that it's not doing well. There's burned ends on the loose wires. This is why it wasn't properly grounded. The close-ups of the jumper attachment 227, you see the arcing, but this is why there's arcing, because it wasn't properly attached. Shouldn't have been there in the first place, but if you're going to leave it there, properly attached it, properly ground it. Nobody fixed that in 54 years because nobody ever bothered to look. Failure to inspect. They were negligent in failing to ground. We've already said that, but they understand that they have to work to reduce the risk of an idle line by outfitting it with equipment to send any induced current directly into the ground. The earth can absorb a lot of electricity if you do it right, but they didn't do it. If we go to Tower 208, where this fire started, they said, hey, we recently discovered to the grounding equipment on part of the line, and we discovered damage on it. Oh my gosh. We're going to work to determine how and when it happened. Well, I can tell you, what that says is we looked at it for the first time after we burned up your town. Anybody that had gone up there and laid eyes on this would have seen this shoddy equipment. And so without repeating myself, you can see the incomplete grounding to the tower. You can see all sorts of evidence of arcing. It's just basically a failure to tighten things up, okay? And that's why you have this. Other end, same thing, just shoddy work and the arcing that results from that shoddy work, because there's nothing to capture the surge. One of the lines didn't have a damper on it. One of the dampers appears to be broken. Half of it's gone. All of this, these sway dampers help prevent line slaps in high winds. We're still not there whether this was line slap or not. I don't think so, but I'm not going to say that yet because we haven't done that analysis yet. That's being worked on. So we have a pretty good idea about why this happened. We had a surge. We had a failure to inspect, a failure to ground, and it's getting pretty clear. You're going to see on 227, the opposite side, that it's just hanging. It's not grounded to the wire. There's a wire wrapped around the conductor, been used to, in effect, tie it to the top of the tower. That's not grounding. They had one tied off to a piece of junk that was in the side of the ground. It's just deplorable work. And you know what? Maybe they were in a hurry after a hurricane, trying to get this thing decommissioned. But certainly in the course of the next 54 years, they could have sent a work crew up there once to fix this. If you're not going to take it away, at least don't leave it as an electrical pile of junk that causes hazards. Southern California Edison has proposed a protocol for additional grounding testing. We're going to do that. But the bottom line is, in every way you look at it, there's just literally negligence for failing to properly ground. And then lastly, my friends at the Los Angeles Times, again, kudos to the Fourth Estate. There is a very fine reporter that did really good work. Now, Southern California Edison wants its stock price to stay up. They say, hey, we're confident that our actions were consistent with the actions of a reasonable utility, says Mr. Pizarro to his investors. That is code word that says we're going to take Chris Holden's AB 1054, let it pay the bill for all the damage that it caused, and we'll get reimbursed because we were a reasonable utility. That's what he's talking about. The financial consequence of being a reasonable utility or not, or being prudent in a $20 billion fire, is $16 billion. If you were prudent, you get reimbursed $16 billion of the $20 billion the fund pays. If you were not, you're not entitled to reimbursement. So that's the phraseology that he's using. But his problem is that the Los Angeles Times comes out and they pull information about the work orders. What did they know and when they knew it, to quote the Senate hearing about President Nixon. Okay? The work orders tell us what they had identified as hazards that needed to be done, and did they get to it? There are thousands of these. The Los Angeles Times identifies open work orders at the end of 2022 exceeding 808,000 of them. 145,000 of those were in extreme or elevated fire risk areas. 76,842 were in extreme fire risk areas. There were 10,000 of them on transmission lines like this one. There were 5,852 on transmission lines in extreme fire areas. Idle transmission lines had 290. There were 20 open work orders on this area, the Mesa-Sylmar circuit, all of which are in the high fire areas. And so the failure to go out and do the work is part of the reason they're here. And even worse, those work orders identify the reason to do the work is known ignition risk. As of December 31st, according to Connor Sheets of the Los Angeles Times, who did this very good investigative journalism, the utility had 94 open work orders along the three lines, the portions of which run past the northern edge of Altadena through the Eaton Canyon. The orders were for a range of tasks, including clearing vegetation that could potentially ignite. Now you remember The augmented work that we just got done yesterday that's showing that stuff dripping off the top, if it hits something without vegetation, it doesn't have fuel to spread. If they fail to complete work orders and clear vegetation under the tower, you have the fuel that is necessary to take a spark. Remember, sparks alone don't cause catastrophes. To take a spark, a small degree of molten material, ignite the fuel because you didn't clean it out because you didn't do your work orders, of which nearly 3 dozen carried an ignition switch as the read. There's a June 2023 work order for weed abatement. Pinpoints the location as a tall steel transmission line where some believe the fire ignited. That is a nice way of saying it's M16T1, where they needed to go ahead and do weed abatement and didn't. And that's why that little fire becomes a conflagration. And the reason they needed to do it is it could spark a fire. Remember, sparks alone don't cause a catastrophe, but sparks plus weeds do. And they didn't clear out the weeds. It was assigned a level 2 priority, which says they should have done it within 6 months because it would have addressed a fire risk in an area with the highest wildfire threat level. And as of the end of 2022, they had 20,000 of those that were more than 180 days past risk, including over 5,000 that showed an ignition switch. Now, when Connor called me, I knew he was working on this and we were sharing information, but I couldn't believe. What this is what we call in the engineering community run to fail. And some of my folks here are very jet propulsion type guys. You do not run to fail in good engineering process. You still need to eliminate the ignition risk. Instead, they've got work orders that are more than 5 years old. They simply did not perform. So this is multifactorial. A spark alone doesn't cause a catastrophe. A failure to do work orders and clean the vegetation under a spark will and did. Their approach was don't fix it until it fails. The problem with that approach is when you're dealing with high voltage electricity, that failure brings with it the loss of 17 lives, the loss of 8,500 homes, the loss of a very important community. That's what run to fail has as its consequence, but that's apparently what their strategy was. What's happening in the litigation? I can tell you, having done fires in this county with judges that sit on their hands, you do not have that judge. It's like Altadena threw up a litigation prayer and begged for a hardworking judge, and we got her. Her name is Lori Siegel. And since she was appointed, she said, look, I want this organized, and we're not going to waste time. So all the different lawsuits got consolidated in front of her, and they were organized. All the plaintiffs' lawyers came together, sued Edison, started communicating. Nobody's waiting on CAL FIRE. They'll be in a year. The LA, whatever the investigatory body down here is, will take a while. We're not waiting. But the bottom line is Lori Siegel is not letting grass grow under the bottom of this tower, okay? She is calling hearings as fast as we can come to the courthouse, which is wonderful. She told us to get organized. We are. We have multiple meetings. We've got committees all over the place. We're having Zoom meetings every 5 minutes, it feels like. It's a full-time job for hundreds of lawyers, and that's good, okay? We've split our work into different committees. There is no grandstanding. There is no fight with each other. I mean, you got big egos, you have a little bit, but nothing to worry about, okay? This is going very well. To give you the best indication that this litigation is moving quick, since February the 10th, when the first hearing was happening, we've had hearings on the 20th, 26th, the 5th of March, the 17th of March, the 3rd of April, today, and we're scheduled for the next one on May the 6th. That is 9 hearings in 3 months. That does not happen unless the Altadena prayers regarding litigation got answered. You have a judge who has risen to the occasion and is putting in the work that this community deserves. for better or for worse. It's not her job to decide who wins. It's her job to call the balls and strikes, but she is in the game, and that is so important in terms of the speed of getting your homes rebuilt. So, you know, if this were a State of the Union speech, I would say the state of the litigation is sound because of Judge Lori Siegel. Full stop. Now, there's lots of other things going on over and above the litigation. We've got to find the money. The state of California has to find the money to rebuild. It requires public investment into its utilities. It requires backstop accounts. It requires New York money. These are all the different hedge funds that participated in the PG&E settlement, which injected $25.5 billion into that bankrupt company. Now, that's been replaced by this AB 1054, which is great, but trust me when I believe you. Your political leaders have everything to do with how fast you get paid, okay? You must understand that this is as much a political problem as it is a litigation problem. The people in Sacramento can solve this problem quickly, or they can sit on their hands and let you wallow. And we'll ask you to participate in the advocacy process. We are honored to have Chris Holden. You all know who he is. I couldn't believe that life is a circle, that the man that wrote AB 1054 that settled the case up north is right here. You know, that's just so important. You know who he is, leader in this area, but most importantly, the chairman of the Committee on Utility and Energy at the time of AB 1054, chairman of Appropriations, knows how to get the money, and the author of the bill that delivers the funds to pay for wildfire damage like this. Just to tell you, I'm not, you know, I went and pulled the bill just to make sure nobody was lying to me, and I knew it was him. But that's huge. It's almost like God himself said, we need to get something ready because we're going to have a big fire in 5 years. And 5 years, this is excellent litigation. I mean, excellent legislation. Others have hired a gentleman by the name of Don Parada. You know who he is. Board of Supervisors, State Assembly back in the 90s, Senate, President Pro Tem. He's a lobbyist now. He's helping in this stuff. So we've got a lot of people working up in Sacramento because part of this is going to take that kind of legislation. If you want to know about AB 1054, Google AB 1054. There's a site that shows you how to do it. But the bottom line is what happens is Southern California Edison can settle your claims and then go to the fund for reimbursement. If the investigatory body, usually CAL FIRE down here, it's Los Angeles, there's some investigatory body, I'll get it for next time, decides that they were prudent, they get reimbursed 80%. If they decide that they were imprudent, they don't. And that's up to the California Public Utility. And so the bottom line is that Pizarro's got a challenge. We want to make sure we've got a strong voice in helping them understand the immediacy of the need to reassure investment. Them is the state legislature. We have to advocate to the legislators the need to satisfy the investors so that we can continue to invest. And that's happening. The most important thing that Pizarro has said is something he said to Reuters on February the 28th. We have confidence in the fund. The fund is only relevant if he did it. He knows he did it. His lawyers won't let him say it. Full stop, Southern California Edison burned your house down. Full stop, Southern California Edison burned your town down. Full stop. Under the California Constitution, Southern California Edison has to pay you for the damage to your property. Because they were negligent, they're going to have to pay you for everything. They keep calling themselves a reasonable utility so they can get this reimbursement. That's a $16 billion bet. My advice to them is don't let us start taking depositions. Because once the record shows that you were imprudent, it's real hard to get it back. What they ought to do is do the responsible thing and pay you now for your damages and, in effect, buy the case before these depositions, which are going to bludgeon them into imprudence. Just the stuff we're finding on the internet. They couldn't sell prudence in this county if they tried. But we'll see where they go. It's going to involve federal. Right now, wildfire recoveries are tax-free, but only till the end of this year. This is a tricky time in Washington with DOGE and getting rid of this and stuff like that. We're going to have to get that extended, so there's work to do there. But what we can promise you is that we are in a race against the clock, which is one of the reasons we're not just here. I like this article. With billions at stake, lawyers pour into Altadena, race to the courthouse, whatever. Don't hire a lawyer based on an Instagram ad. You're doing the right thing coming to these meetings. Figure out who you think knows what they're doing and trust your gut. That may not be me. I'm not saying I'm the only one that knows how to do this, okay? But don't respond to a TikTok ad. Ask them where their office is. We're right across the street from the IBEW, 221. You know where it is. That's the building. Doug's our California lawyer. We're Suite 100. You walk in, you take a left. There is 16 different offices. There's all sorts of people in there, and they are your neighbors. Every one of them was hired from this community and trained by people that have done it 20 times. It's comfortable. There's work to be done. We need to do work with each and every one of you to prove your damages. I think you kind of already figured out, I know how to prove that they're at fault. I don't know how much you are owed until you help me prove it. That's why we got to go in one by one by one by one and do these meetings. And there are some of the young ladies that are going to do it. And they're fabulous, and I'm proud to call them our teammates. Okay? And they're your neighbors. And they've all been trained. And they're well trained. And they know what they're doing now. In large part because we took all the people that we trained in Maui 2 years ago and brought them over here to train them all. And the people in Maui got trained by all the people in camp. And those people got trained by all the people in Northern California. So the people are being trained by people that have been through this. But the bottom line is, a lot went wrong that night. I want to address one thing. If you are one of the 17 families that lost a loved one, in my view, you are the victim of a civil rights violation in the form of no notice of a fire. All you got to do is lay down where the people who died were. They're all in a concentrated area. We're 14 of the 17, and none of those people got any notice. There's not a lot I can do about that in the tort system, but none of this happens without the spark. But what we've learned is delays to evacuation alerts can cause catastrophes. It happened in camp, where 85 people died, got no warning. It surely happened in Maui, where 102 people died with no warning. It happened here, where 14 of the 17 people who died got no warning. Fires came within 700 feet of 11 victims before any evacuation orders were sent. But then we got to, once we win the lawsuit and get the money, about where we are now in Maui. We've got to figure out how to distribute the money equitably, and only you can settle your lawsuit. But there's all sorts of work to be done to rebuild the homes. There are things that we've learned. There are people that are going to try to rip you off. There are good contractors. There are bad contractors. You must get connected in social media groups so that you know who the vendors are that you can trust, and frankly, the lawyers, okay? There's all sorts of permitting that's getting cleaned up in a hurry to get this done quickly. We'll use the considerable talents of Ms. Brockovich back there to jump anybody's face if they slow things down. The reason you still have inverse condemnation is her advocacy in Sacramento in 2018. It literally saved your right to bring this case. And we'll be here until the end. How do you get started? There are folders. You don't have to do them right now, but inside each of those folders, right behind the envelope, you can stick it in or take it to that office. There's a contract. I'm not allowed to do legal work for people who haven't chosen me as their lawyer. I believe in one-page contracts. There are 8 paragraphs. One's the firm's authority. You're hiring us to use our expertise to pursue your litigation. You're going to cooperate with us. Mainly, I got to know how to get a hold of you. When I ask you to come in to do the meeting with the people we've trained, you got to come in. I can't prove your damages without that. You got to collect information. Do not pay people by the hour to do your wildfire case. They will steal from you. We work off of what's called a contingency fee. That fee is 1/3 of the recovery. The good news is it's under the inverse condemnation statute. They have to pay the attorney's fees for the inverse damages. The expenses are fronted by me. I have New York bankers that loan me hundreds of millions of dollars to do these big projects all over the United States. I have to pay it back. There's common expenses, which everybody will share, like the experts, to prove that the fire was done. Frankly, that's not gonna be much because we've already kind of proven it. But all that LiDAR analysis costs several $100,000. If you were my only client, and you had to pay that back, that might swamp the boat. But because we'll have thousands of clients, you'll each just have a little piece of it. Your fire cause and origin expert is named Mike Schultz. He charged me $1 million in the Tubbs fire, but we had 2,000 clients, each of whom got the world's best fire cause and origin expert for $500 a piece. Economies of scale. In order to achieve those, we have to represent a lot of people at once. The ethical rules say we can do that. If we tell you we're doing it, I'm telling you we're doing it. We already represent well over 500 people. But you get the economies of scale. You get permission to get experts at $500 a piece, which is good. We'll use artificial intelligence. My daughter is somewhat of an AI guru. She's going to maybe Berkeley to get a master's. I didn't tell you that. By the way, his son just got into Berkeley, so he's real proud. But anyway, the bottom line is that there's ways to save a lot of money by getting data, and we'll do closed loop. We'll protect your data. Okay. The law and the venue. Beware of lawyers that say, hey, if we have a dispute, you have to do it in secret arbitration because I don't want to be embarrassed. And you got to do it in New York where I know you don't have the money to go do. If you have a dispute with Doug and I, sue us right here in Los Angeles. Okay? We'll come defend ourselves if we didn't do anything wrong. And if we did, we'll pay you. Okay? But just beware of people trying to take you out of state to resolve disputes. And lastly, I come from Texas where they execute everything. If I had a choice, ambulance chasers would be right up there. This is your acknowledgement that we did it the right way, which is we can put media out there. We can invite you to a public setting. You can make a choice to come here to listen to what we're doing and make your own choice about whether you want to sign up. The back is very clear. You give us your full name. I need your email address. Okay, I can't send mail to a burned down house. Email addresses, cell phones so I can text you. When I ask for your main phone number, don't give me the old house number. Give me your cell phone so that I can text you on that iPhone. The damage address, I need to know where the home was that burned down. The mailing address, I need to know where you are now. The average wildfire survivor moves 5 times in the first 2 years after a fire. Make sure you go to the post office and do a forwarding address. I need the identity, the name, the date of birth of each of the residents, okay? We need the nature of the damage claims. Is it an injury case? Is it a death case? Is it a business loss? Is it a burn down house? Is it a rental and the like? Was there physical injury or death? Why does all this matter? To me, and my wife's been trying to get me to retire for 2 decades now, and I won't do it because when we employ our skills correctly, we can turn this, which looks like Dresden in 1945, into a rebuilt, thriving community. One of the reasons that we started with this, the video in Maui, that happened years ago. And it happened for 2 reasons. Number one, Aaron comes up trying to help us, so we're able to do it again in Paradise, but we did the job. And we injected $5.5 billion into that community when nobody said it was PG&E's fault except for us. We did it again in Maui. You can see the houses getting rebuilt. I'm here to tell you that there is hope. There is a tried and true method to rebuild this community, okay? But you've heard the phrase that hope is not a plan, okay? This plan requires work not only from your lawyers, but from each of you. If you do that work, you'll have the smiles that the people in Maui have as they're watching their historic community of Lahaina rebuilt as we speak. So thank you for coming. I'm going to cede the mic to Doug, who's going to introduce somebody far more special than me. But I appreciate you coming, and I am going to do something unusual and slip out the back. And I hate that because I always stay and answer every question, but if my airplane doesn't land by 1 a.m., I can't land, and my wife's going to be really pissed that I missed Good Friday. Okay? So thank you for coming. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Michael. I told you we're going to get educated about what's going on, and I told you Michael's one of the smartest lawyers around. I'm not sure you're going to get that level of detail if you go to another lawyers' town hall meeting. I'm not suggesting they're not good lawyers, but what I'm telling you is the level of detail, the amount of information, the hard work that gets put in, the research that Michael is doing on everything around Edison. If I were you all sitting in your shoes, I'm not in your shoes, but I'm angry about what happened to your community as a result of what we're learning every single day. And the question is, what do you do about that, right? You know you have rights, and I want to bring up someone who knows more about people's rights and how to protect them more than Aaron Brockovich. So Aaron, why don't you come up? As Aaron's walking up, I got to know Aaron. My mom is a former U.S. Senator, Barbara Boxer, and I got to meet Aaron when my mom was doing water contamination issues. And Aaron obviously is famous for water contamination issues, if you've seen the movie, which came out 25 years ago, which is hard to believe. So Aaron, I know no other person that can speak with more authority to help communities have their voice and augment their voice. So Aaron, please come up and talk to the folks here.
I'm not going to talk long. Thank you for coming. Some of your faces I know, some are new, and I always extend my heartfelt apologies to the entire community for everything that you've been through. I live in California. I've been through the Wildfires, and every time I'm with all of you, I can still feel your angst and the fear and the frustration. And it takes a lot for you to show up, and thank you for being here, and I'm sorry for everything you've been through. I'm sorry that Michael left, because if there was a moment that I could express to all of you and have him hear my great admiration for the work that he has done and continues to do in these wildfires. That presentation I had not yet seen, and all I could do was go, wow, wow, wow. What a kick in the gut. He is so methodical and does such a deep dive to conclude and show and prove when a utility fails you, and the support that he'll give for your hope and recovery, something that you so deserve. I was sitting there watching tonight and thinking to myself, well, congratulations, Southern Cal Edison. You just surpassed Pacific Gas and Electric for being the worst utility company in the state. We have shouted from the rooftops since 2018, back in the Northern California Pacific Paradise, excuse me, the lack of oversight on these utilities and the failure of infrastructure. We saw this in Paradise. To see that Southern Cal Edison's lines out there at 102 years old is inexcusable. I am mad for you. I am mad for your community. And I am thankful to Michael, who will dig an endless time and his own money for us to get to the information we need. So if anybody has any reservation or hesitation about Southern Cal Edison, what happened that night, who started that fire, who's responsible to it, it's right here in front of you. This has been a very interesting meeting for me because a lot of things are coming together. As we learn more, this team, I am more than proud to be a part of it. They're boots on the ground, they show up, and they will stay here with you to the very end and to find this information and get you some form of justice that you deserve. And Michael made another point that's so important, how all of this works together. Yes, I can be a mouthpiece and be pretty bad and bring stuff to people's attention. It takes attorneys, it takes that judicial system to support us, to prove it, to get us here. And none of that happens without you and you showing up and you finding the courage that you have to dig for when you've lost your home, your property, your memories, some family members, and animals. We can do this together because in the end, again, as Michael pointed out, there is hope. You do recover. So just know as you go through this process, we will be here to get you the information beyond just litigation, where to turn, groups who are organizing, learning about when you rebuild, is your property being tested for contaminants? Will it have to be private sector? All of this information, and I'm watching this community organize all over the place. It's everything I've worked for, and it's everything I've ever believed in, and it's everything I've seen every single time with every single community. And what wrapped it all together for me tonight, this was a very unique meeting, and we've had a lot, but there was something happened here tonight. It was just a pure energy from the facts, the details, to the presentation, to your courage through your loss in showing up. And what Tia said, it's time to put on the war paint. We can only get there, and we can't get there without you and that fight. I am sickened. As a California resident, for 8 years, we've gone over and over and over and over and over and over again. And not only the failures of Southern Cal Edison, the failures of the leadership. I just can't not say it anymore. This is inexcusable and should never have happened. And after this, it can never happen again. We have to address our failed and aged out infrastructure in this state. Our leadership has to show up. You have to have a plan. You need to start implementing that plan and those changes and being realistic with the communities about how long that's going to take. And while that's going on, by gosh, you better have a plan. You had no plan. You should not be taking hundreds of millions of dollars out of a wildfire fund in a wildfire season. Do not be draining your reservoirs in a wildfire season. Yeah. Be making phone calls to those utilities. What's going on your lines? Where's your failures? Get out there and fix them now. We have regulations in this state, and they are worthless if you have no enforcement and no oversight. That's right. And that is one of our biggest problems. And it will be up to us to push on those leaders to do their job. We cannot afford in this state to have another Altadena, Pacific Palisade, Thomas, Woosley, Kincaid, Bobcat, Northern California, Paradise Fire. We are smarter and stronger than that. It is time to get this infrastructure up to snuff. It is time for us to realize we will not stop the Santa Ana winds, but what we can do is be prepared. Change the infrastructure, manage your wildfire food and source that causes all of these. Manage and have oversight of your utilities so we have a shot in hell to defend ourselves against these forces. I'm so proud of you. I don't mean that in any derogatory form at all, because I know the courage it took for you to be here. And I'm deeply sorry for your loss. I couldn't be more proud of this team that is here for this community, other communities, and will continue to be in the future. And I'm counting on you to put on that war paint, because we can make those changes and hold them in Sacramento accountable so we don't have to go through this again. Thank you for being here tonight.